Ew, it's bloody and dirty. I really hate this. My mother-in-law laughed, pointing at my head. I had collapsed from heatstroke, brought on by being ordered to clean the garden under the scorching sun by my mother-in-law. Where I fell was rather unfortunate, and I hit my head hard on a garden stone. There was so much blood coming from my head that it was all over my palm. Thinking about who caused me to collapse just adds to my headache. I've been feeling nauseous the whole time, and even dizzy. In this state, it's not just driving that's out of the question, even walking is impossible. So, I called an ambulance, but my mother-in-law started giggling when she saw my call history. You called an ambulance for this? Young people are such a hassle. I wonder if they know that real emergencies are being overlooked because of idiots who call ambulances for stupid things. You should have gone on your own. Saying this, my mother-in-law dragged me by my arm, forced me to stand up, and put me in her car. As angry as I was with my mother-in-law for calling me dirty, it's true that it would be helpful if she could take me to the hospital. I reluctantly thanked her for dragging me, the injured party, around. Thank you very much. It's fine, dear, because you're going to the hospital by yourself. She laughed and turned the steering wheel. But the direction she turned was not towards the hospital. Wait, what's up ahead? My name is Sophia, I'm 28. I work as an office worker from Monday to Friday. When I finished work and was watching TV at home, my cell phone rang. The call was from my friend Emma, who had moved to New York with me. Sophia, are you free after work next Friday? I hang out with Emma about once or twice a month. There's a drinking party, do you want to come? With no particular plans in mind, I quickly agreed to go. That's where I met Lucas, who was 4 years older than me. We both loved traveling, and we hit it off talking about the places we visited, so we exchanged contact information. From that day on, I started talking on the phone and emailing with Lucas every day, and we started hanging out on our days off. I had so much fun spending time with Lucas that no amount of time was enough. We were attracted to each other, and about half a year later, we started dating. After we started dating, we traveled domestically and abroad, and made a lot of memories together. About 2 years into dating, we got married. Right after we got married, Lucas was transferred, and I quit my job and became a housewife. Lucas works for a big company, so he's likely to be transferred in the future as well. We immediately started looking for a new place to live. A few days after the transfer was decided, my mother-in-law called me on my cell phone. Immediately upon answering the phone, I was asked, "Sophia, do you have a moment?" To which I responded, "Hello, mother-in-law, it's been a while. I'm free to chat. My husband has injured his leg. We heard you're moving from New York to our area, and I was wondering if you could consider living with us. I'm having a hard time taking care of my husband by myself. It would be a great relief if you were here." And so, she proposed that we live together. Though my father-in-law insisted he was fine because his injury wasn't too severe, his gentle nature made him a man who wouldn't complain even when in pain. Both my husband Lucas and I became worried about him, and decided to move in together. I had visited my in-laws' home once before for a marriage meeting, and it was so large that it seemed it could serve as an inn. Despite the parents-in-law downplaying it as just a country house, it was obviously more magnificent than most other homes. The abundance of rooms was also a factor in our decision to move in. I'd met my father-in-law several times since dating Lucas, and we'd grown close over shared conversations about our mutual love for sweets. About a month after moving in, my father-in-law's injury was healing well and it seemed he would be fully recovered soon. However, during a light exercise session while organizing the storage, he accidentally dropped a heavy object onto his injured leg, causing a fracture. He was immediately taken to the hospital where it was determined he needed surgery and would need to be hospitalized for about 6 months. After completing the hospital admission procedures and bringing back some clothes, I returned home to find my mother-in-law standing at the entrance. "Mother-in-law, I'm back. I'll get started on dinner now." I greeted her with my usual smile, but she stared at me coldly and retorted, "What took you so long? You're so slow it's annoying." I was stunned and couldn't comprehend what had just happened. As I stood there, she flared her eyes and barked at me. "What are you standing around for? Go make dinner!" With that, I hurried to the kitchen to start preparing dinner. The moment my father-in-law was hospitalized, my previously kind mother-in-law underwent a complete transformation. I initially thought she was just in a bad mood, but from that day on, she started bullying me behind my husband's back. When my father-in-law was home, my mother-in-law used to prepare breakfast while I took care of lunch and dinner. But now, I was responsible for all meals and all household chores. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law stopped doing any chores and spent more time watching TV or sleeping till noon. When she was awake, I would get nagged about how the food was too salty or how my cleaning was sloppy. Since the house was large, cleaning alone took a considerable amount of time. The hardest part was managing the yard and garden. Being in the country, both the yard and garden were quite large and dealing with the weeds was a real struggle. They used to hire professionals for the maintenance, but now I was in charge. If any weed was left untouched, my mother-in-law would scold me. I initially endured it, but realizing that I won't have time for our child once they're born, I confided in Lucas. He took my side and spoke to my mother-in-law. Instead of reflecting on your own shortcomings, you've roped Lucas into your scheme. If you were more efficient with your chores, none of this would be necessary. Do you enjoy making me out to be the villain? Really, what an ungrateful daughter-in-law you are. She retorted, increasing her verbal abuse. No matter what we said, my mother-in-law wouldn't listen, and so we decided to move out. However, we had missed the spring moving season, and there were hardly any apartments available. And the ones that were available were too far from Lucas's workplace, so we decided to move into a new apartment that was nearing completion and would soon be open for applications. From spring, past the rainy season, the season turned to summer. I woke up to the energetic sound of cicadas, and started preparing breakfast for my husband and mother-in-law. After sending off my husband, I was about to return to my room when my mother-in-law blocked my path and threw a sarcastic comment at me, complaining about the breakfast not tasting good or the dishes not being cleaned properly. As I was hanging my head, hearing the same complaints every day, I heard a car engine outside. Assuming it was my husband going to work, I was suddenly pushed out the front door by my mother-in-law and I fell on my butt. She then threw a garbage bag at me and said, "Clean the yard and garden today. I won't let you in until you're done." And she laughed as she slammed the door shut and locked it. I knocked frantically on the door, but there was no sign of it opening. I headed for the back door, but it was locked too. A round trip around the house revealed that all windows were locked as well. I was at the front door, seeing my husband off, so I didn't bother to bring my wallet or smartphone with me. Suddenly, I heard my mother-in-law's laughter from behind. "Still standing there? Get a move on and start cleaning. If you work hard enough, I might be gracious enough to give you a drink." She laughed mockingly at me from the living room window, and when I rushed over, she promptly closed and locked both the window and the door, grinning widely. Without any other choice, I reached for the trash bag and started pulling out the weeds that lay before me in the buzzing heat of the cicadas. After a while, I saw my mother-in-law leave the living room. I moved out of sight from the living room and started thinking about what to do next. If I kept weeding under the scorching sun, I was likely to suffer from heat stroke. I thought about asking someone for help, but everyone around me had either gone to work or was out in the fields. It would be too risky to walk under the sun to the fields, so I decided to hide in the shade until my mother-in-law came to check on me. However, there was no sign of her, and before I knew it, the sun had moved directly overhead. With no shade left, the ruthless summer sun began to scorch my skin. Feeling like a boiled lobster, I knocked on the living room window where my mother-in-law had been watching TV. Opening the window with a look of annoyance, she said, "What's this? You've only done this much in 3 hours?" She glared at the yard. Smirking, my mother-in-law pointed to a large weed near a garden stone and said, "Just pull that one out, and then I'll give you some water." With my throat parched, I squatted down near the stone, trying to ignore the nausea. That was the plan, but it seems my body had reached its limit. Instead of squatting, I fell towards the garden stone. When I put my hand to my throbbing head, I saw blood. I must have hit it on the stone. At that moment, I heard my mother-in-law scream. She rushed over, saw my blood, and recoiled. "We need to go to the hospital. Grab your insurance card and come to the car," she yelled, and hurried back towards the front door. I went into the house from the living room and grabbed my wallet and phone. I called an ambulance on my phone, and knowing they would be there soon gave me some peace. As my consciousness started to blur, I could hardly make it to the car park and collapsed onto the cool floor. The chilly sensation of the tiles made me take a deep breath, but suddenly my arm was yanked. "I'm not letting you die here. We need to get to the hospital now." My mother-in-law said this, yanking my arm and forcing me to walk to the car park. Feeling nauseous and wanting to wait for the ambulance, I tried to communicate this to her, but she wasn't listening. Forcing me into the back seat, she started driving recklessly. If I was going to the hospital myself, I thought I should call again to have them stop the ambulance, and as I clutched my smartphone, I realized that the scenery outside the window was odd. Instead of driving through the city where the hospital is, she was driving toward a remote area densely filled with vegetable and corn fields. Just a few minutes later, she stopped the car and dragged me out. There was nothing but cornfields around, and because it was lunchtime, everyone was away eating and nobody was around. Seeing the evil grin on my mother-in-law's face, I gripped my phone tighter, but she forcibly snatched it away. Young people these days, calling an ambulance just because they've got a little blood. Can't you think of what the neighbors would say if an ambulance came to our house? In this day and age, there are too many fools calling ambulances for trivial reasons, causing trouble for people who really need help. You, such a foolish daughter-in-law, need some discipline. Stop moping around and walk to the hospital yourself, haha. She put the snatched phone into her own pocket and began to drag me, dizzy and weak, toward the cornfields. The view from the edge showed nothing but lush rice plants, no one in sight. Stop it! I pleaded desperately with her, but she just chuckled and said nothing. My mother-in-law violently shoved me. Suddenly there was no ground beneath me, and I was bombarded by pain from all directions. Looking down at me moaning, she laughed with satisfaction, then got back in the car without looking back. Wait, please, wait! I screamed as I clutched my throbbing head. But all I heard was the diminishing sound of the engine. My mother-in-law had dumped me in a cornfield and drove off. I closed my eyes to escape the glare of the sun. Without my phone, I couldn't call for help. An ambulance wouldn't come to such a remote place. Even if I wanted to signal for help from a passerby or a car, no one would see me from the road, lowered a step from the rice field. I might die here. That was my last thought before my consciousness faded to black. My eyelids fluttered. After blinking several times, I saw a white ceiling filling my vision. Looking around, I realized from the clean bed and surroundings that I was in a hospital. Lucas? I spoke to Lucas, who was lying face down, holding my hand while sitting in the chair next to the bed. Lucas jerked his head up. Sophia, I'm glad you woke up, he said, tears welling up as he hugged me. He had stayed by my side until I woke up. Lucas explained to my confused self why I was here. I hadn't died, but had fainted from heatstroke. Fortunately, the owner of the cornfield returned early after having lunch and discovered me collapsed there. He quickly called an ambulance for me. I was in a critical condition, so I was transported to a large nearby hospital and narrowly escaped death. When I heard the name of the hospital, I realized it was where my father-in-law was admitted. He seemed to have come to check on me several times out of concern, so I thought vaguely that I should go and thank him later. Then, I remembered about my mother-in-law. Lucas, about her. Lucas took a deep breath, gripped my hand tightly, and began to speak with a serious face. My mother-in-law returned home with an innocent face and tried to send the arriving ambulance away, pretending she knew nothing. The cautious paramedics suspected she might be the prank caller, and were questioning her when the front door suddenly opened. Mom, what's going on? Why is there an ambulance parked at our house? The one who rushed in was Lucas. Originally, he was off today, but he had to go to work due to an unavoidable task, and came home as scheduled in the afternoon. The paramedic explained that they had received a call about a case of heatstroke with bleeding from the head and came to this house, but since the crucial person who reported wasn't there, they were talking to my mother-in-law. Lucas, taken aback by the serious manner of the explanation, immediately called me from there. Just then, my mother-in-law held Lucas's arm, breaking into a cold sweat, and laughed. I remembered, shopping. Sophia said she was going to do the lunch shopping. That's why she'll be back soon, right? Not only Lucas was suspicious of her behavior. Sir, please call your wife. Didn't you hear? She'll be back soon. As soon as the paramedic said this, my mother-in-law lunged at the man from the ambulance crew. Meanwhile, Lucas dialed my cell phone. The ringtone of my cell phone could be heard from my mother-in-law. Oh, this is my ringtone? I asked Sophia and set the same sound. It's such a coincidence that I got a call at this timing. Mom, show me your cell phone. Lucas confronted my mother-in-law who was rambling on in a fast pace. Lucas, exasperated by the feigning ignorance of my mother-in-law, forcibly put his hand into her pocket. And, glaring when my cell phone came out of her pocket. My mother-in-law, who let out a small scream, ran upstairs as if escaping from Lucas. He chased her immediately, and she seemed to have slipped just before reaching the top of the stairs. She fell down the stairs, and her legs were obviously twisted in a way they shouldn't be. In the end, my mother-in-law was sobbing from the pain in her leg and had no time to talk about me. The paramedic said they would contact the police and search, and Lucas agreed readily. For now, they couldn't leave my mother-in-law as she was, so they had to take her to the hospital in the car. And at the hospital they arrived at, Lucas said he had found me by chance being brought in. If I hadn't been at the hospital, they were planning to call me after you woke up and heard what happened. But I'm glad I found you, even if it was a coincidence. Lucas left my mother-in-law to the doctor and was with me all the time. Sophia, I'm sorry. I never thought my mom would go this far. She's not a violent person, even if she's sarcastic. I'm really sorry for putting you in danger. I'm glad you're alive. Saying this, Lucas apologized to me, shedding big tears. Fortunately, my head wound was not serious, and the bleeding seemed to have stopped by the time I was brought to the hospital. Rather, the heat stroke caused more damage, and I still had an 4 in my arm. But it's almost over, and as long as I don't feel dizzy afterwards, I can go home. When I think about going back to that house, I feel depressed. Then I suddenly wondered what had happened to my mother-in-law since she came to the hospital. Lucas, you didn't do anything wrong. But I can't live together anymore. So, what happened to her? I asked while stroking Lucas's crying back. Lucas said a little awkwardly. Actually, she's in the next room. Apparently, due to the availability of beds, my mother-in-law is next door now. I can feel my heart pounding and my pulse quickening. If they had found me later, I might not be here now. Thinking about it made my body shake with fear and anger. Mom broke both her legs and will have to be hospitalized for a while. I guess it's karma, Lucas said with a stern look. I couldn't just back down quietly and said, Lucas, I'm going to see my mother-in-law now. And got out of the bed. There was no dizziness, and I could walk normally, so I went to the next room with Lucas. Since my mother-in-law was the only one in the next room, I walked straight to the back of the room, stood by my mother-in-law's bed, and said, You look terrible. Do you understand a little how I felt when I wanted to call an ambulance? When my mother-in-law saw me, she snapped. You're as fit as a fiddle. I bet it was just a pretense of illness. And didn't even try to meet my gaze. Unable to contain my anger, I firmly stated. After that, someone immediately called for an ambulance, which is why I'm still standing here. If it weren't for that, I might not be here right now. Meeting you now made me realize that you have no trace of remorse for what you did. I will sue you. Be prepared for that. My mother-in-law was yelling things like, You're just a lousy daughter-in-law. Or, I won't forgive you for suing me. But I ignored her and left the hospital room. The next day, I was discharged. Just when I received a call from the new apartment management company I had applied to, I went for a viewing and decided to move in on the same day. Moving in was quick, and since we could move in right away, my husband Lucas immediately hired a lawyer to prepare for suing my mother-in-law. When we went to my mother-in-law's hospital room with the lawyer, she had a blank expression at first, but gradually turned red and started yelling. I really can't understand what you're thinking. Is it wrong for a young person like you to clean the garden? It's your own fault for pushing yourself and ending up with heat stroke. To be honest, it'll be tough to sue you for what happened until Sophia collapsed, as there's no evidence. But there's a record that Sophia called an ambulance on her phone. We saw that you had Sophia's phone after that time, and both me and the paramedics saw it. Besides, there are traces of Sophia's blood in your car. So, we plan to use these points to make a case against you. My mother-in-law was shocked by Lucas's cold words, and she kept crying and insulting me. You can say whatever you want, but be prepared that insulting or defamation charges can lead to heavy compensation. When my voice reached her, my mother-in-law slumped her shoulders and continued crying. We left the rest to the lawyer and moved to the new apartment. We enjoyed a peaceful life together. And about 3 months later, my mother-in-law called. No one had brought her a phone while she was in the hospital, so she hadn't been able to make any calls. As a result, I had completely forgotten to block her calls. Seeing Lucas nod next to me, I nervously answered the call. Why is nobody at home? This is your home, right? Come back with my son. Both my husband and I have become unable to walk, so we need someone to take care of us. It's only natural for a daughter-in-law to take care of her in-laws, even someone as dumb as you should understand that, right? Just as Lucas's face turned red and he was about to shout, we heard my mother-in-law's laughter from the other end of the line. Oh, and one more thing. Return the money I lent you right away. Honestly, you borrow money from your parents and call it compensation. Stupid women like you have no idea what you're thinking. I'll have to give you proper education for your rotten way of thinking. Even after taking a few seconds to process my mother-in-law's words, I couldn't understand what she was saying. Listening to my mother-in-law's continued words, it seems she thinks the compensation she paid me was the money she lent me. I was at a loss for what to do, and Lucas clenched his phone tightly. The one with a rotten mind and way of thinking is you, Mom. We won't have anything to do with you from now on. Don't ever come back or try to meet us again. Look up the meaning of compensation in the dictionary. Stay away from us for good. Following Lucas's loud shouting, I shouted just as loudly. Then, we hung up the phone and quickly blocked her calls. Lucas even deleted my mother-in-law's contact information. Even though we had treated it as a settlement after receiving the compensation, I decided to consult the police about my mother-in-law's situation again. It turned out she was already being sued by the owner of the cornfield, due to my fall in the cornfield leading to a loss of harvest. Moreover, when I fell, I collided with the water pump in the field, causing it to malfunction, making it impossible to add or drain water. As a result, the condition of the corn deteriorated rapidly, and the owner was furious. Since my mother-in-law had paid me the compensation, she had very little savings left, and her situation became dire. And I finally understood why my mother-in-law wanted money back, but it was no longer my concern. I brought a gift basket and apologized to the owner of the cornfield for my fall, but he kindly laughed and said that it was the person who pushed me who was at fault. In the end, my mother-in-law took on debt to pay the settlement to the owner of the cornfield and is now working desperately to repay it. Actually, my mother-in-law had been asked for a divorce by my father-in-law and was driven out of their house. In her eyes, I was still the thief who stole her beloved son. And she couldn't stand it when she realized I had a good relationship with my father-in-law. That's why she planned to dominate me while my father-in-law was in the hospital to establish her position. However, it backfired, and she ended up almost killing me. My father-in-law left behind some inheritance after dividing the property and sold the house before moving away. My mother-in-law lost her home and has been living in a pitiful state every day. She is still searching for my father-in-law, but she won't find him, because he now lives with us. My father-in-law is with us until he gets a new house after selling the previous one. Of course, we haven't informed my mother-in-law about it. My father-in-law was safely discharged from the hospital, and now his condition has improved to the point where he can go for daily walks as part of his physical therapy. While his everyday movements have become a bit slower, he doesn't require full-time care, so we opted to watch over him from nearby. I still maintain a good relationship with my father-in-law, and on days off, we even go on trips and have meals together.